I'm JG Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. As always, if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. That's patreon.com/parallaxviews. $10 tier and above supporters get a producer's credit shout out at the end of each and every edition of Parallax Views. And if you're a $5 tier or above supporter, you get a monthly bonus show hosted by yours truly and my colleague C. Derek Varn. We usually go 3 hours or longer on those bonus shows, so there's a lot of meat on the bone if you're willing to shell out $5 a month. With that out of the way, on this edition of the program, we're going to be hearing from a guest that I was really excited to have on. In fact, I was kind of nervous when recording because I'm like, oh my gosh, I hold this person in such high regard. I'm talking about the very funny comedian, but also sharp, insightful, and smart political commentator, Kate Willett, who recently penned a piece in the New International magazine that caught my eye entitled Abundance, Big Tech's Bid for the Democratic Party. We're going to be talking about that article, and if you're unfamiliar with the abundance agenda, it's being pushed right now by figures like Ezra Klein, most notably, and it has a lot of big tech connections. So what does that mean, and what does that entail for the future of the Democratic Party? All that and more on this edition of the program. I think you're going to find this conversation fascinating. So with that being said, let's get right to it with Kate Willett. Welcome to Parallax Views, a guest that I'm really happy to be speaking with. Kate Willett is a comedian, writer, and actress known for her smart stand-up that tackles everything from relationships to politics. She's appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and she is also the author of the Audible original Dirtbag Anthropology. She has a new podcast with Emil Torres that we'll be talking about a bit here, and she wrote a piece that I just had to reach out to her about and have her on the show to discuss: Abundance, Big Tech's Bid for the Democratic Party, which is at the New International. How are you doing, Kate Willett?
I'm doing good.
So, with this article, Abundance, Big Tech's Bid for the Democratic Party, if people don't know, what exactly is the abundance agenda? I mean, I know that Ezra Klein, and I think, who's the other author? Derek Thompson?
Derek Thompson, yeah, so that's a great question because people are using it in a variety of different ways. So I'll break down how people are using the term abundance and abundance agenda and then talk about how I'm using it. So on the one hand, Abundance is a book that was released in March by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein. The Abundance Agenda is both an article by Derek Thompson from 2022, I think from The Atlantic, and it's also a set of policy positions being pushed by a number of different think tanks that I'm sure that we will go into. And beyond that, it's being used, the abundance agenda is being used as kind of a catch-all term for a new direction for the Democratic Party. And it's starting to get, I think, some traction, especially within centrist members of Congress. They just formed, I think right now they're forming an abundance caucus in Congress. I can't find out exactly who is in it yet. I'm not sure that that's public. This just came out yesterday. But, it's being promoted by a set of think tanks as a new direction for the Democratic Party. And these think tanks are, I think, hoping to function kind of like the Democratic Leadership Council, as in like, hey, we're gonna, we're gonna do a forceful takeover of Democrats with this sort of, this plan that we've laid out for a centrist future.
Okay, so I mean, to me, this whole abundance agenda just screams, you know how there's that meme, fully automated luxury communism? I feel like this
Yeah,
is just fully automated luxury neoliberalism. This
that
is sort
is
of like the third way neoliberalism 2.0, maybe.
I think that's 100% right. It is fully automated luxury neolibs. I think that a lot of the inspiration for the abundance agenda is coming from China. It's tech billionaires and also Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson and just people in the tech world asking, "Hey, why can't we be China? Why is China able to have a high-speed rail, these amazing EVs?" Like I think I saw that now with China, there's EVs that you don't even have to charge because they're solar powered through the windows, through solar glass, which is, it's like China has all this amazing stuff. And so basically, this is like tech billionaires in particular, people whose life centers around innovation, asking like, "Hey, is there a way that we could be China without having a Marxist-Leninist party?" And this is kind of the speculation about that.
If you were describing this whole abundance thing to someone who is not familiar with terms like neoliberalism, or they're just like my mom, she's not super political. She is a fan of your stand-up, though. How would you explain it to someone like my mom who is kind of like apolitical or not in the loop on everything?
Well, so I mean, that's such a good question. I'm going to see if I can answer this concisely. I probably would take a minute to explain what neoliberalism is. And I probably would explain it like, hey, so through from the New Deal to the 70s, to Carter and Reagan, basically the thinking for the Democratic Party was, that they had to be a very pro-worker party and that they were going to, focus on, redistributing wealth to make sure that everybody had at least the basics of what they needed, like the New Deal and the Great Society. And they were also, really the relationship with labor unions was really important. But then with Carter, and then certainly way more with Reagan, the Democratic Party decided to become, and the Republican Party too at the same time, decided to really start focusing on deregulation, heavily influenced by the ideas of Milton Friedman that, what we want to do is get the market as free as possible. And, then the wealth from the top, the additional wealth that is created will then trickle down to those at the bottom. And this has been kind of the economic thinking, the primary economic thinking for, I mean, decades at this point. And the abundance agenda is a way of justifying, like, how can we sort of keep going with that type of system where the wealth and power are concentrated at the top. We don't really do that much for workers. A lot of people got pretty sick of that idea over the past decade. That's why Bernie Sanders got so popular, and people like AOC are so popular, and drawing crowds of tens of thousands of people. They need kind of a new sheen on neoliberalism. And you can't just say, like, hey, we would like to do the same thing that Bill Clinton did, right? I mean, like, Bill Clinton, he was successful, but he was successful in the time that he was in. Like, bringing Bill Clinton's politics back, in 2025 or 2026 or 28, people have seen the consequences of those politics over time. Bill Clinton, for example, really, decimated America's welfare system, public housing. And it's like, maybe things that sounded good to people back then, we've seen like, okay, the actual impact of that stuff now has been bad. So there needs to be a justification for like why we would keep going with just more deregulation, why we would not do something like Medicare for all or build public housing so that everybody who can't afford a market rate unit has a place to live, and we don't have homelessness in the same way. And to me, the abundance agenda is like all that plus this kind of sci-fi is this sci-fi element that basically we're not going to need redistribution in the same way because what we will have instead is a future where there's just so much wealth that everybody will have enough. There won't be homelessness anymore because we'll have so much housing that housing will be really cheap. AI is going to generate a ton of wealth, and people are going to be able to relax because AI is doing most of the jobs, and somehow this wealth will be, distributed equally. They can't, I think that they can't say like, hey, we want like Bill Clinton politics again. They have to add something to it.
They have to make it sexy, I guess, or sound sexy.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also in addition to making it, just general neoliberalism sound sexy, there's a very specific tech element here, right? Tech billionaires,
Well, I
given
was going to say, not to interrupt you, but that's where I wanted to go with you next because it's very interesting to me how you start the article, which is you talk about how Ezra Klein literally says that his sort of vision of the future, he wants to be like the counterpart of a Mark Andreessen. And Andreessen, as people know, is a Trump supporting venture capitalist, and I think it's very telling that he wants to see himself as like the counterpart to Andreessen, like the almost like the Andreessen for liberals, I guess.
yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I have been joking around calling him Lib Andreessen, but he is so basically something happens in 2024 where a bunch of tech billionaires, even tech billionaires who had opposed Trump in the past, all consolidated around Trump. And there's a few reasons why this happened. And a lot of them are rooted in the Biden administration. The FTC and the CFPB under Biden did do their job as regulators. And, like, I think Mark Andreessen, a company he was heavily invested in, got in trouble for, scamming, doing some kind of cryptocurrency scam. I don't remember the details of it, but he was really mad. Andreessen was really mad at the CFPB. There was a lot of antitrust suits under Lena Khan. They also, got rid of some things that the tech industry really loves, like non-compete agreements. What those are is basically like, a company will force you to sign a contract that you can't work for a competitor, which is tough. It means that people can't change jobs to something related in their fields. And non-compete agreements were banned as results of Lena Khan's efforts. And there was just all this stuff that basically tech billionaires really didn't like. Maybe one of the
Yeah, and
things that
that's
is
what's really, not to interrupt you, but that's what's really interesting about like Ezra Klein's framing of the left doesn't have enough of a vision of the future. Like people like Mark Andreessen has a vision of the future, and we need to be more like Mark Andreessen, or I want to be more like Mark Andreessen, but for the liberals. And it's like, well, Lena Khan had a vision for the future, didn't she? I
yeah.
mean, but he completely, he just sort of says no. I want to be with the tech billionaires. They're the future. Yeah.
Well, I mean, okay, let's steel man Ezra Klein's position here, right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah. Yeah.
so we got all these tech billionaires going to Trump, include like longtime conservatives like Peter Thiel and people that used to vote Democrat in the past and donate to Democrats in the past, like, you know, um, I'm trying like Sam Altman, okay? Like he spoke out against Trump in the past. And almost all the tech billionaires supported Trump this time, both because of the regulation under Biden and also because in terms of like the things that they want to do for AI, which is use an incredible amount of energy that doesn't even exist yet. Like it's better for them to have a president who does not even believe in climate change, right? So someone like Ezra Klein, who is really close to Silicon Valley, Derek Thompson, and even more, this billionaire named Dustin Moskowitz, who is the funding behind almost every abundance agenda initiative, him and this other billionaire, Patrick Collison. But Dustin Moskowitz, he is one of the co-founders of Facebook. And if you look at his Twitter, he's like, he's like I'm a cool progressive billionaire. I don't like this sort of fascist thing that my fellow tech billionaires have going. And, I think this could be like an attempt, and it probably is an attempt from the remaining Democrats in Silicon Valley, especially Dustin Moskowitz, and those like Ezra Klein, who are they're not billionaires, but they're in this community and they're in this milieu to say like, okay, what can we like, what's our vision for Silicon Valley that could bring people back to the Democratic Party, get them away from Trump so that we don't have fascism? And, I'm sure like there's something benevolent about the motivation, even though I don't personally like what they have done, because I don't think that the country should be run by Silicon Valley at all.
Well, that's the problem, right? Is it's almost like with this abundance agenda stuff, it's like, well, Silicon Valley will own both parties if the abundance agenda sort of succeeds.
That's exactly right. And I think that, how that how that works, like to take it out of the realm of broad statements and into like how is that going to function? Basically, like this is a pitch. The abundance agenda is a pitch for tech billionaires to start donating to candidates who embrace abundance, which is like I think for a little context, these abundance ideas, like way before Ezra Klein's book, like this is the language that has been discussed, for politics, especially around San Francisco and the Bay Area, since 2022 intensely, but even before that, right? Like they've been having this abundance conversation in the tech circles for a long time. And making the Democratic Party the party of abundance, if that works as they want it to, and it gets tech billionaires to come back, that means that they'll be giving money to Democratic politicians, that they will be funding these abundance themed groups. Right now, we have a bunch of them in the San Francisco Bay Area and some throughout the country as well. And they're almost all funded by Dustin Moskowitz's org, Open Philanthropy, which is an effective altruist org. We can maybe come back to effective altruism in a second. But, like in San Francisco, the only place where like abundance politics is really a thing, how it played out is they gave can I swear on this? An F ton, a fuck ton of money to moderate, super tech friendly Democrats to unseat progressives. And that has had disastrous consequences for the working class of San Francisco and especially people without homes. Like they've all supported really brutal policing of people who are homeless. And they spent a lot of money and time trying to unseat, and they did successfully unseat a pro-tenant democratic socialist. His name was Dean Preston from the Board of Supervisors. Yeah.
Not to interrupt you, but I was going to say there's a big figure that figures into all of this San Francisco stuff, this tech baron, Balaji Srinivasan. Can you speak to him and his role in all of this?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that, like Ezra Klein, Eric Thompson, this guy Dustin Moskowitz, who's like the billionaire that's giving all this money to the abundance initiatives, they're not on the same. They probably see themselves as very opposing of Balaji Srinivasan. Balaji Srinivasan is a crypto billionaire who came up with this book called The Network State. And what the concept of the network state is like that there's going to be basically, like all these sort of little crypto states, cryptocurrency states, and they'll be like fully privatized, anarcho-capitalist in some cases, or they would be ideologically aligned. I guess to be fair, Balaji Srinivasan says like, hey, any group of people who are ideologically aligned, could have whatever type of governance they want, but like there's kind of a few ways to get a network state. One is to do this type of stuff that we've seen, like Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen fund, where you have like this special economic zone in Honduras. It's called Prospera, and they made a little tech utopia there where there's just like it has completely different laws than Honduras. Like it has completely, the policies aren't the same. It's like 100% deregulated. It's a privatized city for tech bros, and they have plans to do this in many different places. There's a company called what is it called? I think it's called Prometheus Capital. I could be wrong about that, but basically, it's one of the investors in Prospera, and they have the CEO even like made a pitch to like buy Greenland or some shit. Like they imagine like doing these little, you know, tech bro crypto utopias everywhere, and they would be like as much as possible separate from the government of whatever place that they live in. The other way to create a network state is to take over an existing government. And Balaji Srinivasan has even proposed like taking over San Francisco by buying off the police with like tons and tons and tons of money and actually getting all the non-tech people and progressives out of there through like, just basically forming an alliance between tech and the police. And, to some extent, they've actually been successful at it. But Balaji Srinivasan is definitely like a hardcore right-wing guy. He believes in this vision, where where the US is almost about to collapse, democracy is almost done, we're kind of making plans for after the collapse. And I think that someone like Ezra Klein or Dustin Moskowitz, like they really don't agree with him, but
Would you even put like someone like Jeremy Stoppelman in that camp?
I don't really know that much about Jeremy Stoppelman except for that he has given a lot of money to YIMBY orgs. I think he
I
was
see.
he was one of the first, and YIMBY stands for Yes in My Backyard, and it's kind of the proto-abundance, right? Like YIMBY is just about housing. It's just about deregulating to build housing, usually in terms of zoning changes, but it can also be stuff like, scaling back the fire codes or getting rid of rent control laws or anything that is going to spur the market to build more housing. And Jeremy Stoppelman has been involved with that, but I don't know really that much about the rest of his politics. But I would say where Balaji Srinivasan and someone like Dustin Moskowitz or Ezra Klein overlap is that, they both have this vision of like build, 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 and that regulations are the thing that are causing us not to build. And like Balaji just takes it like way, way further to like we should have not democracy altogether,
But I
where
think what you're saying is both aren't necessarily the optimal way out of the problems we're facing.
I don't think so. No, I mean, to me, I think that what needs to happen is, we need a major redistribution, not just of money, but also of power. Workers need more power in this country. We need more democracy in this country, not just at the polling place, but at the workplace as well. I think that like what AOC and Bernie are doing with the like fighting oligarchy tour, even though I got my criticisms about like, hey, how much are they actually fighting oligarchy? But I mean, like, we got to look at how Elon Musk was able to get wealthy and powerful enough that he could buy himself a shadow presidency. And then we got Ezra Klein and Balaji Srinivasan and Mark Andreessen and all these jokers being like, oh, actually, the way forward is to give tech billionaires even more power. No, I don't think so.
So let's talk about the groups that are behind this abundance agenda push. And it's interesting to me because I don't think they're even really being like covert about how astroturfed this all is. And I think at the center of it is the Niskanen Center, where, Matt Iglesias is a senior fellow there.
Yeah, I mean I think it's the Niskanen Center. I could be pronouncing
I
it
may have
wrong.
mispronounced it wrong myself.
They are a neoliberal to they're a neoliberal to libertarian think tank, and they put out a lot of centrist or libertarian policy proposals. And they even have a blog post about their plan. Here's how we're going to astroturf the abundance faction. We're going to build a constituency for abundance that does not exist, and it's going to be center-right Republicans who are disenchanted with Trump. It's going to be pro-growth moderate Democrats, which it's like, okay, pro-growth, like what does that mean? It could mean good things. It could mean really bad things. What are we growing, And I forget what the other group was. I can actually like pull it up in a second. But it's worth noting that there are sort of two lines of thinking on this. Like Derek Thompson, at the Abundance Conference, he really was, like, we got to build a constituency for this. We have to build a popular movement to support these policies, and by these policies, they mean like a wide variety of things that we can, get into. Matt Iglesias, on the other hand, he doesn't agree with Derek Thompson, and he sees abundance as an elite persuasion movement. That basically, this is about getting politicians and billionaires to buy into this stuff, and the less involvement that the typical voter has with it, the better. Like people learning about this is only going to be an obstacle. And I actually think that when it comes to when it comes to how it's actually playing out, how these abundance policies are actually playing out, like, it's certainly in San Francisco, they have been able to build sort of an abundance faction, like a kind of a new type of right-wing Democrat, but it's hard to really see that happening outside of California, where like the issues are just very different. Like, it's like why is a voter in Michigan going to give a flying F about a high-speed rail in California as one of their animating political issues? Like you say to someone in New York that like, oh, what we got to do is like give real estate more power. Well, okay, real estate owns this city. Real estate put Eric Adams in office. Like, for the most part, they get what they want. Like, are there areas that we could rezone? Sure. But I don't think anybody in this city, except for maybe like the abundance people, feel like, that real estate not being able to get what they want is like really a huge obstacle. They're mostly able to just bribe the politicians.
Now, earlier you mentioned the effective altruist. Would this be a good time to get into that whole weird world?
Yeah, absolutely. So abundance and effective altruism are not a one for one at all. Like there's effective altruism, effective altruists are into a lot of different things. The thing that they're most like publicly famous for being into, malaria nets, which is like good, but it's basically the idea that you should be able to really track the like effectiveness of your donation. How many lives can you save? How many lives can you improve? And they have organizations that allege to track the effectiveness. Obviously, there's things that you can critique about that, like, a community center, for example. It could be extremely useful. It could be, really bettering people's lives, but to them, that would be not an effective donation because it's not necessarily like adding gears to someone's life to have a community center, even if kids have no place else to play. It's not effective, right? So like their model for like what's effective is limited. They're very focused on existential risk, as in like things that are gonna kill all of humanity. They think so. So like pandemics, nuclear war, and the latest one, the one that I would say that they're most obsessed with,
Is it going to
is
be AI?
it is AI, and it's specifically AI killing everyone. So basically, I mean, it's so silly. It's like AI coming to life and doing something that annihilates all humanity. There's this guy, Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is probably the biggest AI doomer, most famous AI doomer in the entire country.
Yeah, this all
And
gets into like I think Rocco's Basilisk.
yeah, no,
The
it's
first
it,
episode I ever did of Parallax Views was actually with Elizabeth Sandifer, who wrote a whole book about Yudkowsky and the neo-reactionary types. I've come
yeah,
full
no.
circle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so like effective altruists, they can be left wing, they can be right
Yeah.
wing, but I think of the idea of abundance, it has been very popular in the effective altruism community for a while, and there's kind of two connections with the abundance movement. One is that a lot of the money for all of these abundance initiatives, all of these abundance orgs, all these think tanks, it's coming from an effective altruist philanthropy. Back in 2022, there was two main funders of effective altruism, Sam Bankman-Fried and Dustin Moskowitz. And, now Sam Bankman-Fried is we all know what happened there. He's in prison. So now it's really just Dustin Moskowitz, and abundance is a real passion of his. And then like the other kind of more nebulous connection is that effective altruism, it appeals to tech people because it's very utilitarian. Like the thing that a lot of tech philosophies, ideologies have in common is that they're sort of just utilitarianism again, and that's kind of what effective altruism is. But like abundance is okay. Like let's just give an example to make this real. And one example that Ezra Klein has in his book is about removing the requirements for air filtration next to the freeway in Los Angeles. Right now, you have to have a certain quality of air filter to build, and he makes the case for, getting rid of that because it will allegedly allow more building. Even though I looked up these air filters and they're like $25. Like what scientists are saying about the air filters is that they can be helpful and that kids, people, but especially children, can get pretty bad diseases from the pollution next to the freeway. So Klein is making or Ann Thompson making a utilitarian case to like get rid of this regulation, right? Because it might be ultimately more beneficial to like have more housing and not have it be delayed in any further way by this law. So it's like we're sacrificing something that, hey, it might be important, but like in terms of the amount of good that will be done in the long run if we sacrifice that thing, so it's just like there's just a lot of things that, aren't super just 100% mathematical ethics. Like, there was a big argument with like abundance people online this week is like they really want they seem to be mobilizing to get rid of a community garden in Harlem. And it's like because it would be housing would be a better use of it in their opinion, even though like it's a really small lot. It's like how much housing could really go there, and it's also like, dude, I don't know, like there's something fucking weird and creepy about a bunch of white guys in San Francisco telling Harlem that they're not allowed to have a community garden anymore, and it's like I don't know where I was going with that, but it's
Well,
not
it's
just the
just this
money.
desire to like solve the issue I have with effective altruists is I don't think that you can solve all these problems through a math equation.
You can't solve all the problems through the math equation. And someone made a post on Hacker News, I don't know when, but like probably a decade ago about engineer's disease, which is their theory of it was that like these guys are good at coding, or even in Elon's case, like maybe even good at building a company, but then they think that they can solve every problem with the same approach. Whereas like with housing, personally, I would want to take into account, like I would want to take into account like racial and economic justice in ways that might not be, really easy to mathematically quantify. Like somebody who's a hardcore YIMBY would say that, all right, let's say there's a building of 80 people, 80 low income families. And, the landlord wants to get rid of that building, bulldoze it, and then they're going to make a new building that 110 people can live in, but it's going to be all studios and it's going to be really expensive. Like to the abundance person, like that's still a win because you got a higher number of people there, right? But like to me, I'm like, okay, but like some of the people that you bulldozed out of their housing, like they're not going to be able to find other housing. Like they're homeless now, or they have to leave the city. Maybe they have to leave a community that they've lived in for years. And there's kind of there's I don't want to say intangibles because a lot of it's very tangible, but like there's things that have to be taken into consideration, in my opinion, that are taken into account by traditional housing justice orgs, but the abundance people like do not give a fuck.
So one thing that's really interesting, I know you took great pains to say, well, a Moskowitz is very different than, say, a Peter Thiel, but it does seem like there's this weird sort of well, with the Ezra Klein book, Abundance. I mean, he goes to great lengths to be like, the left is the problem. We have more in common with the right in this way and that way. There seems to be this sort of alliance going on, and you talk about this a bit in the section called Stopping the Progressives. Can you speak to that more?
Yeah, I think that like abundance liberals, their vision for a good government is still really technocratic. There's aspects of it that are undemocratic. It's not populist. It's explicitly against populism. It's against progressivism. Peter Thiel would take that all the way to the point of saying like freedom and he's this real thing he said, freedom and democracy are no longer compatible. And someone like Curtis Yarvin, who he's into, I know you mentioned like talking about like neo-reactionary stuff, like Curtis Yarvin, Mark Andreessen's really into him. Like the tech right guys, they want to take this all the way to the point of like we just don't have democracy at all anymore. Like the government is literally run by a business. There are, certain so rich people can be shareholders in the business and then they would have more influence. But like us plebes, like if we don't like it, we can leave and we can take our money and our presence to a different business. No democracy whatsoever. I don't think that the abundance liberals want anything like that. But they also don't want like, worker power. Like a lot of them are very anti-union. They certainly want to eliminate any community input into, development, which is a mixed bag, right? Like that's, it's good and it can be good and it can be bad. Like I honestly think it completely sucks that like people in rich neighborhoods will try to block affordable housing because they don't want poor people around them and they suck. And so, that would be the positive side of getting rid of community development. But then it's like you think about the other examples that are kind of queasy of like, okay, this country has a history of urban renewal. This sort of like 100% top-down urban planning that has, been devastating to Black and Brown communities. So many people displaced, state-sponsored gentrification. If you look at somewhere like New Orleans, they use the hurricane to just remake that city. And this idea that the people who live in a community don't get a say whatsoever in what happens to their community, I think becomes actually really problematic when you think about, how that has been used in the past. And like, if I was going to critique my own opinion, like if I was going to be like a left abundance person thinking about that, I would say like, okay, well, like, have these marginalized communities like gotten a say anyway, and it's like, well, really, no, not enough. Like, this the kind of urban planning as violence has happened again and again to marginalized communities, and maybe getting rid of community input could potentially sort of balance the scales. However, I think that the idea of just getting rid of it altogether is not right. Like, I think we want to reform the process in some ways, but I think that in some cases, like, communities should have more input, not less, like in socialist urban planning, like looking at, how urban planning was in like the Soviet Union or whatever, like, the stuff that was built, like, did people get like a say 100% of the time? No, honestly, no. Like, there were authoritarian aspects of it, but the stuff that got made was for the most part for the benefit of the community. Parks, schools, housing. Whereas, like, here in the United States under capitalism, it's not for the benefit of the community. It's for the benefit of capital. And NIMBYism, there's this planner named Robert Lake who had this really good essay in a journal or a journal article about NIMBYism, where like his thesis was basically like NIMBYism in the US, it is people resisting capital. That can be for good, that can be for bad, but it's not resisting the public good, it's resisting capital. Sometimes capital does stuff that aligns with the public good, sometimes it doesn't, right? Like, a thing that we're going to see come up a lot, I think, over the next 10 years is nuclear power plants. That's like what these like AI guys like Sam Altman really, really want is like nuclear power plants everywhere. And like people are really going to want to trust that those will be managed safely?
What's I know you talk a lot about your opposition to YIMBYism. What's the biggest misunderstanding people have when it comes to your views on YIMBYs?
I think the stupidest one is that I hate housing. Like, nobody hates housing. I know that's not a real position that anyone has. Like, it's completely made up. Like, um, I think like I absolutely do not believe that the market is going to solve our problems. I think if we want to end homelessness in this country for real, it's going to involve giving people homes. It's going to involve having public and social housing that working class people can afford. I think if you look at somewhere like Vienna that has a lot of social housing, people are paying, depending on how much their salaries are, 4% of their income sometimes, 8% of their income sometimes. And NIMBYism is about tinkering on the margins through zoning, where it's like, maybe if it works as planned, okay, our rents still go up, but they go up a little bit less quickly, you know? Sometimes it doesn't really do anything at all. Like, there's been rezonings that like actually didn't spur very much construction at all. Legislation that YIMBYs have passed in California, I think like one of the bills that they pushed through ended up resulting in like a couple hundred new units or whatever. But it's like, I'm not like necessarily opposed to rezoning, but it's like not a real plan. It's certainly a stupid thing to have as like the sort of center of our housing discourse, right? Because it's not going to do anything for the people who most need housing right now. If it works exactly as people want it to, it will have, make our rents go up a little bit less quickly, and that it'll be over years and years.
How do you see this playing out, this abundance agenda movement? And what do you think the greatest threat it poses to the left and, a more leftist politics?
I mean, okay, I think that there's one view that um is just not really going to change anything at all, because there are already neoliberals, there are already centrists, and like if they get a new branding, like, okay, to some extent people see right through it. You know, I think the biggest risk is that these tech billionaires, they do come back to the Democratic Party, people like Mark Andreessen, and they start investing in candidates who are, w willing to do their bidding. And like, I mean, to some extent, that's already happening, right? Like we see people like Adam Schiff, who's taken a lot of crypto money and like surprised he's like pro crypto and like Richie Torres and stuff like that. But the worst thing that could happen with this abundance agenda is that it goes exactly the way that these couple remaining liberal tech billionaires wanted to, and their friends and colleagues come on back to Dems, and we never see someone like Lena Khan again. We never see an active CFPB again. We don't see these antitrust lawsuits. Like it's just a party that's pandering to Silicon Valley. It also might like do nothing because here's the thing, right? Like the thing that the abundance people are correct about is that NIMBYism is very real. Like there are a lot of people, in single family neighborhoods who really don't want apartments next to them. I don't care. Like to me, like I live in a city, like there's apartments everywhere. Like whatever, apartments don't bother me. But in general, like a lot of moderate Democrats in this country, a lot of center right people, they do live in these kind of like wealthier single family neighborhoods, and like the chances of them embracing like this energy and housing deregulation plan, it's like pretty much zero. Like you think someone who like lives in Westchester is going to want a nuclear power plant and a bunch of like new apartment buildings next to them? No. Like and you know what? Honestly, I don't care what I have like no side of this really. It's just it's capital. It's shitty rich people versus shitty rich people. But I would say for what the abundance people are trying to accomplish, like with some modifications, their natural allies are the left. Like if you look at someone like Zoran, who is running for mayor of New York, he has this plan that it's like, yes, rezoning, but also building a lot of social housing, public financing for housing, for social housing, improved transportation, free buses, and these things that would dramatically improve the lives of working class tenants. And like for, a sort of like a more left version, yeah, there is a constituency for that. And it's renters, it's working class people who care about public transportation, they care about affordable housing. But like the thing about the centrist YIMBYs, the centrist abundance people, they're kind of like, well, our priorities are getting rid of rent control, no good cause eviction. We do want better transportation, but if anything, we should raise the price of it. And their main goal is like to get leftists and progressives out of office. So it's kind of like, who is this for? Like I don't think that
I was
this.
gonna joke, it's almost like is this abundance or is it austerity rebranding?
Yeah, I mean, it is austerity rebranded in some ways. If you think about like, okay, like is the biggest obstacle to housing really that like people living next to the freeway get an air filter in their house, a fucking $25 air filter? Like if you can't have a $25 air filter, yeah, that's austerity. It's not abundance. I mean, it's abundance for the rich, but for the rest of us, it's not very abundant.
Before we close out here, what do you think of the Fight the Oligarchy movement that AOC and Bernie are heading up, and the, regular everyday people, nurses and other workers and unions? How do you think they're going to stand up to this?
I mean, like, I'm glad that Bernie and AOC are doing that tour. It is great to see all those people throughout the country coming out because they reject Elon Musk, they reject Doge, they do not want our government to be controlled by billionaires, and they are on the right track. Like, the question is like, how do we mobilize those people towards something enduring, something that, is actually going to fight the oligarchy, like we're trying to keep Andrew Cuomo out of office in New York. He is the oligarchy and he's a sexual predator. And AOC has not endorsed Zoran, So it's like, well, how much do you want to fight the oligarchy? What does it really look like? Like she has said that she's not going to back primary challengers to Democrats anymore. And so I'm just like, I think their vision for Bernie and AOC is like fight the oligarchy without ever fighting Democrats, which is like, sorry, the oligarchy is bipartisan. So I do think that the people who are showing up to those rallies, have their heart in the right place, and probably a lot of them are going to do amazing stuff in their communities or already are doing amazing stuff in their communities. Maybe some of those people are going to run for office, but with AOC and Bernie, it's tough because they want to fight the oligarchy, but do they want to fight it enough to like go to bat with Andrew Cuomo, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer? Let's see. I'm not 100% sure either way, but I've been disappointed more than a few times now.
How much do you think it's going to be maybe people outside of the Democratic Party that are going to be leading the sort of fight against both the tech right and the sort of abundance agenda? What I mean by that is I think we're seeing a resurgence or have in the past few years of unions, and I think that's going to play an important role in things.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up unions. That makes me think about Jared Polis, Governor Jared Polis. He is a hero of the abundance agenda. And Colorado has, one of the most difficult laws in the country in terms of forming a union. You actually have to have two votes. The first one, 50%, you got to get to 50%. But then I think there's a second vote needed. We have to get to like 75%. It's the most onerous requirement for starting a union, I think, anywhere in the country. And they like finally changed the law. And then Jared Polis, abundance Democrat, was saying like that he was gonna veto that, right? Like one of the worst things about abundance is that it is pretty anti-union a lot of the time because yeah, like if you're paying like fair wages for construction, yeah, maybe the construction is gonna cost a little more, and we instead of this race to the bottom of like just exploiting workers more and more, perhaps we could have like social housing where it doesn't, have to, return profits to shareholders and Wall Street, right? But like, yeah, I think in general, like, the labor movement, I've been excited to see, the resurgence during Biden's term. There was some really exciting union wins, and I really hope that that keeps going. I hope, even though there's probably a lot of people in unions do vote Democrat. You're right, it's a separate thing. It's it's not electoral, and I think especially with like, 2 years almost or a year, before there will be an opportunity to like vote on a lot of things. Like, we got to be doing that other stuff, not just unions, but, direct actions. Tenant organizing is one of the most important things for housing.
There were just two more things I wanted to touch upon here. I know you have to get going, but I think the big takeaway for me when looking at this abundance faction, Ezra Klein and others involved with this may not they don't necessarily have the same intentions as you pointed out as maybe a Peter Thiel or a Srinivasan or like a Curtis Yarvin, but it's sort of like a diet version in some ways. Um, and it's like it's less bad, but also okay, maybe an abundance Democrat gets into, you know, the White House. And then, 4 years later, a Republican gets in who is more on the Curtis Yarvin side, and the Yarvin people are just going to take a sledgehammer to everything. And it's like the
Yeah.
abundance movement, these sort of abundance faction, can't really do anything to like fight back against the right in a way.
Yeah, I mean, both sides
I hope
favor,
that makes sense what I'm trying to say there. Yeah.
I think it does. Both sides favor an oligarchical, technocratic form of government where specifically tech billionaires are the people in charge. They're the ones who will save us. They are the smartest, they are the richest. I mean, it's really a difference of degree, right? Where like a socialist or even a progressive is going to want like a really much bigger, more meaningful change to the system that we have, or perhaps on the left end is going to want to get rid of capitalism altogether. And ultimately like the abundance liberals and the tech right. I mean, like It's like, should we have a technocratic oligarchy with no democracy, or should we have it with a little democracy? I would choose a little if you made me, gun to my head, pick one of those two options. But
Yeah, but there
I
has
hope
to
for
be a
something.
better third option.
Yeah, that's the real third way. Yeah.
In closing, what do you want my listeners to get out of this conversation? And then please feel free to plug your new podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I
Like,
think
what's the one big takeaway people need to get?
I mean, I guess I wish I had something like really quippy to say right now, but I would say that like we need a politics of some kind or another. We need working class politics. Like we need the working class in this country to have a lot more power, and this isn't the way. If anything, abundance seeks to obscure class struggle, right? Like that's one of the points of it. Like it's not a coincidence when it came out, like it's like, hey, instead of fighting, instead of the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, it's you versus your NIMBY neighbor or whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm not saying that there's no NIMBYism, but like we do need to be like, there is a class war in this country. That's not a goal that I have. It's just an accurate description of what is happening. Like the 1% is, getting ever richer, and, the conditions for so many workers in this country, people don't have health care. People are working, multiple jobs sometimes to still not make ends meet. I think there's like at least 700,000 people who have no homes at all. I mean, it's like fucked up. And to actually change anything, we are going to have to really dramatically redistribute power, not just wealth, but like power. Like we need to get back to like New Deal at minimum. Right? Like that would be the minimum. And I think like organizing is going to be, a lot
Do
more
you
important.
almost, not to interrupt, do you almost view like the YIMBY NIMBY thing almost as a like side distraction that some people get too caught up in?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just a distraction, it's a propaganda. It is pro-capitalism propaganda. I mean, like that's not to say that there aren't any NIMBYs, but this is a frame for politics instead of, class-based politics. Like, wow, that's super convenient for the billionaires, right? Like,
And then just promote your podcast with Emil if you can.
yeah, so I host a podcast called Dystopia Now, and I host it with Dr. Emil Torres, who is an academic, a philosopher, and one of the most brilliant critics of tech, I think, in this whole country. Emil used to be a long-termist, which is related to effective altruism. It's perhaps, effective altruism billions of years into the future, like Elon Musk is a long-termist. And now Emil's not a long-termist anymore. They're one of the biggest critics of long-termism in the country. And so each week we go through a different ideology that is popular in Silicon Valley or a specific billionaire, and we talk about what their ideology is. Like we did a two-part series on Sam Altman. We have a couple episodes on the abundance agenda. We also have we just did one on right accelerationism with Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin. And I think for people who are interested in the way that tech billionaires are trying to influence our country and what their vision is, it's an interesting podcast. I hope you check it out.
Well, I hope we can talk again in the future. I've actually had Emil on the show before, like
Oh,
years
nice.
ago
That's
now.
wonderful.
So we need to get all three of us together for a chat at some point.
Oh, yay. That would be great. We would love that.
Thank you so much, Kate Willett, for coming on Parallax Views.
Thank you so much.
This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to
Galen, Matt,
Gunnar, Mark,
Simon,
Alexander, Catherine,
G,
Tilo, Emilia,
Jeremy,
Jeff,
WV,
John,
Bert,
Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick,
Mersham,
Galen,
Gareth,
Arlen, Bo,
Christopher, Michael,
Gigadelic Media,
Will,
Chance, Chase, Dan,
Big Bob, David H., Y. Kellerman, Sadeed 13, Kathleen,
David,
Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast,
Jamie,
Enoch,
Gary,
Max,
Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho,
Brian,
Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. As always, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said,
until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.